Welcome to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. I'm the sports editor of the Herald Democrat, Jason Del Rosa, and you're listening to the latest edition of the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast. It is Realignment Day. It is a day that many have been looking forward to for months, perhaps even years, depending on the district that you've been in for the past two seasons. But we have reached the official day where the University Interscholastic League has released the upcoming districts for the 2022-23 and 2023-24 academic years. Lots to digest, whether it's football, basketball, volleyball, the other sports, all the way through. And we're going to break all of it down. I'll give you some thoughts and some comments on everything that we learned earlier this morning. For those who haven't seen the districts, you can obviously go see everything from around the state at the UIL website. So you may already have an idea of what we're talking about. But as we always do here on the podcast, we will work our way from top to the bottom. I'm going to go through the football portion first, go through all that, and then we will talk about the other sports and the districts that they're going to be in. And so we will start at the top, like we always do. In 5A, and in this case, it will be the Class 5A Division I football, and that is where we find the Sherman Bearcats. And that is a situation, as we start that off, and we can probably say this across the board in a lot of cases. Very interesting results that were put out there. Of course, we knew some of the things that were going to happen today. We knew, for instance, that White Ray was going to be going down from 3A to 2A. We knew that Howe was going to be going from Division 1 in 3A to Division 2. And we knew that Collinsville was going to be going from Division 1 in 2A to Division 2. For both of those were for football. But we did know a lot of other things. And the way that the districts came out today really turned in that direction. We saw, starting right off the top with Sherman, as we talk about District 6-5A Division 1, and that is where the Bearcats are located, and they are the only team in that district that does not start with the word Frisco in it. There are 8 other teams in that district, so this is a 9-team district, and all of the other teams that are in there are in the Frisco ISD, and those teams happen to be Frisco Centennial, Frisco Heritage, Frisco Lebanon Trail, Frisco Liberty, Frisco Lone Star, Frisco Reedy, and Frisco Wakeland. And right off the bat, this is a huge change from where Sherman has been the last couple realignments. They were out in an eastern-based district for the most part, and especially the last two years they had been with Highland Park. Highland Park, we talked about this a little bit during the football season, and when the cutoffs came out to where Highland Park was moving up to the 6A level, to 6A classification. Wiley East was another one that was moving to 6A, and so that would reshape the district at the time. We knew that obviously could not stay the same because of those two changes alone, and so we knew there were going to be some changes. We didn't know how vastly different things were going to be for the Bearcats, and it actually turned out to be a gigantic swing, and it actually worked out really well in Sherman's favor. Because their old district, 7-5A, essentially stayed the same. Some of the names that you throw out there are the same: Longview, Tyler, McKinney North, West Mesquite. Those are the names that Sherman has played in some cases for the last 4 years. And in adding into that district was Forney, Lancaster, Lufkin, and North Mesquite. So obviously there's adding Lufkin in there, who was a potential by-district opponent because it was in the district next door under the old system. really added to the travel in that district. And as you can tell, a lot of the teams are out that way. And then you throw in McKinney North is sort of the odd team out. And, obviously everything, when you look at how things fit in other districts, it is sort of interesting to see that McKinney North is the team that's in that district and Sherman is in the district that it is in with the Frisco schools. And I would speculate that you could essentially say that was a coin flip, because I think if I'm a McKinney North Bulldog, I'm sitting there saying, well, you could have sent us west and into that Frisco district, and you could have kept Sherman east with those schools and essentially had the same sort of setup. And so Sherman, I think just off that alone is one of the biggest winners from the realignment announcement today, because if you look at their district, it's all Frisco schools. So you're going to Frisco no matter what when it comes to a district road game. The first game of the season, obviously Battle of the Axe, this year is going to be at Denison. So that's a road game, which is literally right down the road. And then whoever they throw in for their second non-district game, you're basically looking at the longest trip that Sherman's going to take is probably to Frisco, as opposed to if they were in the old district, you'd have to make a trip to Lufkin, you would have to make a trip to Longview, you would have to make a trip to Tyler. Two of those are probably going to come in the same season. Just the trip to Lufkin probably would be more miles on a bus or hours on a bus than they're going to spend the whole season in this new district. So just from a travel standpoint, this is a huge win. It's also a major win because for those who remember, if you finish third and fourth in the standings to make the playoffs, you have to go on the road and play at your opponent. It's not a neutral site location. It's at their home stadium. And under the old system, Sherman had to go. They could have played at Lufkin in the first round. They played at College Station in their most recent playoff appearance. They had to play at Magnolia. Magnolia West was the actual school, but that's outside of Houston. So you had to make a super long road trip. If they had stayed, if they were in that McKinney North spot and they did make the playoffs and they were not a 1 seed or a 2 seed, the matchups now in that bye district are in Baytown. We're talking Port Arthur. We're talking Barbers Hill. We're talking even further than what they were doing before, and you would have to make that trip. And it would work the other way. If Sherman were to be in the top 2, you would force somebody to essentially have to drive the length of the state to come up north for that playoff game. Now, if they make the playoffs and they do have to go on the road, you're talking about a DISD school, you're talking Mansfield, Carrollton, Birdville. Much easier, not just for the players and the coaches, but the fans as well, because that's you can do that on a Friday night. It's extremely hard to say, hey, Sherman is playing at Baytown Lee. I'm going to be able to go to that game. So Sherman is obviously the even though they are first on our list, I think they're going to end up being the biggest winner based on what happened. It still is a competitive district. Some of those schools came out of Denison's district: Frisco, Lebanon Trail, Frisco Liberty. Frisco Liberty has a great offense. Frisco's been really good and state ranked the last couple years. Lone Star's always good. Wakeland's usually pretty good. Reedy has had its moments. So it's gonna be a fight to get a playoff spot in that district. But it was going to be a fight in the other district as well when you're talking about Forney, Lancaster, Longview, Lufkin. North has been a playoff team. Tyler's been a playoff team. So from a strength of schedule standpoint, they might actually end up being pretty even. And like I said, at best, Sherman comes out ahead in terms of the travel. So that's where things look in terms of Sherman coming back into the Metroplex DFW area for their matchup, and there really was no other place that you could put them. If for those who are on the UIO website and end up looking at the region as a whole and the whole division as a whole, there's really not another spot other than if McKinney North and Sherman were to sort of swap spots in those districts. Somebody did ask me, do I think McKinney North's going to appeal that placement? You can. Sherman and Denison have done that before when they were back together and they were sent either west or east into super far districts that they felt didn't make a whole lot of sense. You can appeal anything. Anybody can appeal. The question is, how likely is that appeal to be approved? They may appeal it just to make a point. Hey, please don't do this to us next time. We'll deal with it for the next 2 years, but we don't want to have to deal with it going forward. The problem with moving McKinney North out of that district is that the Sherman district, the Sherman-Frisco district, is a 9-team district. And if you put North in there, or in District 5, which has those Carrollton schools, some DISDs, Birdville, that's also a 9-team district. So no matter where you move them, it's putting it's almost filling up a full schedule of just district games, and they don't like to do that if they can avoid it. And that also means that the district that they're leaving would be a 7-team district, and just from a competitive balance standpoint in the region, you would have a 9-teamer, a 10-teamer, an 8-teamer, and then a 7-teamer. And I don't think it's really unfair to have one district be that much easier than two of the others in trying to make the playoffs. So I think they could appeal it. Maybe there's a 5 or 10% chance that they would move McKinney North into Sherman's district, but I think it's going to stand that way at least for the next 2 years. We shift down to 5A Division II, and that's where we find, as always, the Denison Yellow Jackets. They also were interested to see what was going to happen. We touched on it when the numbers came out and the cutoffs were released. Prosper Rock Hill was going to go to 6A, so they were going to be moving out. They were losing essentially all of the Friscos. 3 of the 4 Friscos were moving to Division I. Frisco Memorial was the one holdover that was staying in Division II. And so there was definitely going to be changes to Denison's district. I didn't think it was going to be this severe based on what Coach Whitson thought was going to happen. It's definitely a different feel. And the district number stays the same, so Denison stays in District 7-5A Division II. However, there are plenty of new faces in this district, and this is a district that now has Denison and 2 holdovers that Jacket fans have seen in the most recent stretch with Lovejoy and with Princeton. However, all the other teams in the district are new, and those new teams are Crandall, Greenville, Melissa moving up from 4A, Mesquite Poteet, and Terrell. Now, Terrell and Greenville are 2 opponents that Denison has been with before. It's been a really long time, but they have been in district with those teams before. Obviously, Melissa, they never have been, and I don't think they have been with Poteet or Crandall, at least since I've been covering Denison. They definitely have not. And this was, again, a situation where when you look at how they put things together, there was really only one other option for Denison. They could have gone to the west. They could have been in the district out in Region 1, which has some of the teams that Denison has been with before. And that district out there is Argyle, Carrollton, Creekview, Denton, Frisco Emerson, Frisco Independence, and Frisco Memorial, and Lake Dallas. They could have put them there. I think, again, it was sort of a 50-50 coin flip. You could have put Denison in either district, and I don't think there's much of a difference either way. I don't think you can say, we fit better in this one or we fit better in another. But I think this is going to be an interesting district. More than half of the teams have made the playoffs before. I would imagine, just going off of last year, Lovejoy is going to be the favorite just because of what they bring back and what they've done the last couple of years. But obviously Melissa's had some really good success in 4A. They continue to grow, and they've moved up the rankings, and even as they've moved up, every time they still put together some really good seasons. They've had some really good athletes for a school of their size, and as they continue to grow, they've been able to adjust. They used to be in that really tough district that had Argyle, Paris, Salina, all in the same district. So they know about facing really good competition. And then some of the other teams, Princeton's obviously another team that Denison knows. They've had 2 blowout wins over them the last couple of years. But it's going to be interesting to see because you get these new faces in here, teams that either you haven't played or you haven't seen in a really long time. I know, Greenville's one that some people can go back, 10 or so years. That's when Denison was in that district with them, and Sulphur Springs, Texas High, some of those teams when Denison was back to the east. I think looking at it initially, it's a good mix. Obviously with Denison losing the large senior class that they have, so many of the guys that were 2 and 3 year starters, a lot of guys that signed to play in college. It's going to be interesting to see how things come together for them, because there are a lot of question marks just from we don't know what to expect from both sides of the ball compared to the last couple of years where Denison always had the same guys, it seemed, coming back. And so it is interesting, too. This is a little bit of a smaller district. There's one less team, so obviously that's essentially one less team that you have to fight to have to get into the playoffs. And that might be something that is a factor going forward. But so that's Denison's new district. The number stays the same, 7-5A, Division II. And I'm looking forward to a lot of these matchups, and as we kind of see and get to delve into who has what coming back and that sort of thing, we'll get a better handle on it. I mean, this is just a day of sort of stream of conscious first-hand reaction to what things look like going ahead. I think the region as a whole is interesting. I will note, because Denison made the playoffs this last year and lost to Ennis in the first round, the districts have kind of shifted a little bit. So Ennis is not a potential first-round matchup. If Denison does make the playoffs, you're looking at playing some East Texas teams, one of those being Texas High, who they've played recently because of a COVID scheduling change. But you're looking at some of the names that are familiar: Hallsville, Pine Tree, Marshall, Mount Pleasant, Texas High, White House. Those are some of the teams that you're talking about potentially matching up with in the first round of the playoffs. So definitely a different feel. I'm going to have to go back and look. I feel like this is the first time in what feels like maybe 15 years that Denison is not in a district with a Frisco school of any sort. I feel like those have been rare, few and far between. But it should be an interesting district for the Yellow Jackets going forward. And again, with them, I've talked with Coach Whitson in terms of the non-district. Obviously, they'll open with Sherman in Denison for the Battle of the Axe after last year's game was at Bearcat. And it looks like Frisco Reedy, one of Sherman's new district mates, is on the non-district schedule. And it looks like the Colony is going to be the third game. A lot of schedules probably won't be out for another week or so. I know the bad weather, the winter weather that we've had is going to affect coaches getting together and having their meetings and and hashing out schedules and all that sort of stuff. So that stuff will trickle in, and be on the lookout for that, because I know everyone's interested to see not just who people play, but also the order in which they play them, home and away, that sort of thing. But I know that's Denison's plan is to start at home against Sherman, and then the plan is to play Frisco Reedy, who was also in Denison's district, not this last cycle, but the cycle before that, before Reedy moved up to 5A Division I, and then the Colony would be a new addition as well, because Denison the last couple years has only been able to do the 2 non-district games instead of 3. So that's a look at Denison in District 7 5A Division II for that football district. Moving down to 4A, we have Van Alstyne in 4A Division II. And there's some changes for the Panthers as well. We noted for the last realignment they were in a really small district. They were in a 5-team district, and 4 teams went to the playoffs. So all you had to really do was beat one team. Whoever finished in last place, as long as you beat that team, you would go to the playoffs. It's a little tougher now. Most of the teams are still the same. Van Alstyne is still with Aubrey, Crum, and Sanger. But Salina has made the move up to Division I, and in their place they added 3 teams, Bridgeport, Farmersville, and Gainesville. So now this is a 7-team district, and so that means you're playing 6 games instead of 4. So you're probably going to have to. So if you're going to make the playoffs, you probably have to win 3. 2 might get it done. But if you get to 3, you're almost certainly in the playoffs. So that's obviously a little bit of a twist for Van Alstyne. They did make the playoffs both of their first 2 years in 4A. This last year they made a little bit of a run. Were able to get a couple rounds deep. However, that did come in Region 1. Part of this realignment here shifts Van Alstyne, that whole district, Van Alstyne and others, back into Region 2. And they're now they're in District 5 4A Division 2, and that's going to make it a little tougher. Maybe not in the first round, where you're going to face the likes of a Caddo Mills or a Quinlan Ford or a Wills Point, but on the other side of the region, there are some heavy hitters, namely Gilmer, namely Carthage. If you get to the second ramp, Texarkana, Pleasant Grove, you're talking about some of the heavy hitters in East Texas, some of which moved over from Region 3 into Region 2. That definitely is going to make it more of a challenge if you get past the first round, depending on what side of the bracket that you happen to fall. So Van Alstyne is definitely in a tougher scenario, one just to make the playoffs because you have to beat more teams. And also moving back into Region 2, which I think everybody would look at that and say that's definitely more of a challenge, or the strength of the teams is better in Region 2 compared to what Van Alstyne had been dealing with in Region 1. So should be an interesting mix for Van Alstyne. And it'll be interesting to see what their non-district schedule looks like, because there's obviously going to be fewer opportunities for them to play games before jumping into district play there in their 4A Division II district. Moving down to 3A, we'll do 3A Division I. This will be really quick. Both Whitesboro and Pottsboro are here in 3A Division I. Of course, we mentioned at the top how dropped down from Division I into Division II, so we'll get to them in a minute. But essentially, Whitesboro's District 4 3A, stayed exactly the same, except for Bowie got moved next door. So you have your normal grouping of Boyd, Brock, Paradise, Peaster, Pilot Point, Ponder, and Whitesboro. The loss of Bowie is not really a loss per se. They finished at the bottom the last couple of years. So it just tightens things up a little bit. And obviously Brock, and I would assume the same 3 Brock, Pilot Point, and Whitesboro are your favorites, just based off of what they did last year. And, of course, Brock and Whitesboro were in the region final, with Brock getting that win to advance ultimately to the state championship game where they finished as the runner-up. So I would assume much of that is the same to have to navigate that path. You're probably looking at, again, 3 wins to get into the playoffs, and you might have to win the right 3 games to win a tiebreaker there. For Pottsboro, again, Howe left that district. Otherwise, exactly the same. You have Pottsboro, Bonham, Commerce, Mineola, Mount Vernon, Rains, and Winsboro in District 5 3A Division 1. Again, exactly the same. The team at the bottom of the standings ends up leaving. And so you're still dealing with some of that East Texas travel. You probably still need to win 4 games to guarantee going to the next round or to the playoffs. 3 might get it done depending on what you're dealing with. And that district, as we've seen the last couple of years, has been really competitive. It's come down to tiebreakers. It's come down to people rooting for certain people in the last week of the season to change the outcome of the standings. But for the most part, 3A Division 1, Whitesboro and Pottsboro know exactly what they're getting into. Their districts essentially stayed the same. And so everybody is well aware of what they're going to be dealing with, at least for the next 2 years for sure. So that's 3A Division 1, and we'll go down to 3A Division 2. This is where we had another curveball. We started off with with a couple in Sherman and Denison right away, and then as we worked our way through the bracket, through the list of districts, we got down to 3A Division 2, and you go to look at District 8 3A, which has been full of all our local teams. We knew going in, White Ray was going to come out. They were going to go down to 2A because they had a drop in enrollment and they slipped below the cutoff. And so with Howe moving down from a football standpoint, I assumed that Howe was going to drop right into White Wright's spot. You'd have the same 7 teams, or 6 of the 7 teams would be the same, and Howe was just going to replace White Wright in District 8. And that's essentially what happened. You still have Bells, you still have Gunner, Howe jumps into White Wright's spot, you have Blue Ridge, you have Leonard, and you have Lone Oak. You've got 6 of the 7 schools that you had last year. The difference is the UIL decided to take the 7th school, SNS, which obviously we care about here in Texoma and Grayson County. They decided to shift them back to the west and put them in a District 6 3A Division 2, which now has SNS, Callisburg, Henrietta, Holiday, Valley View, and City View. So, one, I'm not happy with this because it takes we had all the 3As in that one district in Division 2, and now they're split. I didn't think that was gonna happen. I was kind of surprised that they split. For those who remember, before this last cycle, SNS and Gunner had gone out west and been essentially in a district that looks extremely similar to this. And for whatever reason, they decided to shift SNS and keep Gunner here in an eastern district. They could have. I think they did it for balance. Every district in this region, except for 3 of the 4 have 6 teams in it. So I think they probably did it from that perspective. But selfishly, I'm not happy to see SNS go. I think, and of course it's hard to tell because obviously SNS is going through a coaching change right now after Coach Alleman decided to become the offensive coordinator at Denton Braswell. So this move is happening without knowing who's in charge, what they're going to like or dislike, that sort of thing. I think you could say it's beneficial for SNS to move out West from a competitive standpoint in terms of instead of being in a 7-team district, you're in a 6-team district, so it's a little easier to make the playoffs. You have one less team you have to beat, and I think it's a little it could so from that standpoint it could be beneficial. The travel isn't terrible. It's not as good as it could have been by staying closer to home. So I think that's sort of the good news, bad news of it is there might be a slightly better chance for SNS to get back into the playoffs with this move, and as long as they can live with the travel, then it could work out for them. And then the old district, obviously it's going to be interesting to see how thrown in there. They are the new kid on the block with these guys who have been together for a while. It's going to be interesting to see. Obviously, Gunner is Gunner. They're coming off another appearance in a state championship game. They have a ton of kids back, even though there are some holes at some key spots. They always seem to reload and not rebuild. Bells is going to be interesting because of some of the pieces that they lose, but again, they have some key spots. With some veteran leadership. And I think obviously going into the season, you have Gunner and Bells kind of pegged as the top two teams. They've been since this in the last couple of years they have been 1 and 2 in the standings. And then the question is who fills in behind them. Obviously Howe is dealing with a new head coach, and that change, and obviously just dropping down to have them be a little more competitive. Leonard's a team that normally is in that playoff mix. Blue Ridge has been up and down in that mix, so it's going to be that. I think that's going to be an interesting district. It's a little tighter because it's only the 6 teams, so you got to win at least 2, and it's got to be the right 2 to get into the playoffs. And it's going to be interesting to see as the projections will come out. Sort of who people think is the 3rd best team in that district. I would assume it's Leonard, just based off of what has happened. But again, Leonard's one that has some key losses to deal with as well. And so if you assume those are the top 3, then you're really looking at, I think, a really good race for the final playoff spot between the other teams in that district as well. So, but that was definitely a big surprise when that came out, that they decided to send SNS away at least for 2 years, depending on what happens going forward with enrollment numbers and that sort of thing. That was definitely something that was unexpected. I thought if they were to move them, that they would it would be like the last time where their Gunner and SNS are travel partners, and they wouldn't split them up, and they ended up doing that. So that was definitely one of the surprises of the day in realignment. Moving down to 2A, we knew that there would not be a surprise with Whitewright moving down. In the olden days, before they released the cutoffs and enrollment numbers for everybody to see, that definitely would have been something that would have come out of potentially out of nowhere, that we would have been waiting to see. But we knew Whitewright was moving down to 2A. We knew, like we said before, Collinsville was moving from Division 1 to Division 2. Lindsay was also moving from Division 1 to Division 2. So that was going to change the district that did house those 2 schools, as well as Tioga and Tom Bean. And for the most part, that district stayed the same, the 6-2A Division 1. So you still have Tioga, you still have Tom Bean, you still have Trenton, and you still have Alvord. And then they slid Whitewright into one of those spots, and then they slid Nakona into another one of the spots. And in talking to some of the coaches that were interested to see what would happen there, that was kind of the projection. That really wasn't a surprise. Nakona's kind of out in the middle of nowhere towards the west, so they kind of assumed that once Lindsay and Collinsville dropped down, that was going to be possible. The only potential issue with this district was because now you had the extra team sort of in this area with Whitewright, sandwiched between Tom Bean and Trenton on a map. Was it possible that Trenton could maybe go to the east, hook into a district with Honey Grove, Wolf City, Quinlan Bowles, some of those people? The numbers didn't work out, and they were actually needed to be in this district because it's only a 6-team district. And so to make the balance fit, they kept Trenton going to the west. That's something to watch going forward because of the way that the teams are kind of on the border between Division I, Division II. Like one of the changes that also hurt was like Celeste dropped down. So in 2 years, it'll be interesting to see if some of those schools have a little bit of a bump in enrollment. We may see, Tom Bean, Trenton, and Whitewright maybe shift to an eastern district depending on how things shake out, because there's a couple of ways the UIL could cut in between. They cut between essentially like Trenton and Wolf City, but they could cut between Trenton and Whitewright. They could cut between Whitewright and Tom Bean. They could cut between Tom Bean and Tioga. There's a lot of options there in 2A depending on how things fluctuate from realignment to realignment. So that just keep that in mind, that it looks like it's a good little district. It's obviously good for us here in Texoma because you have those 3 teams all together. You have 2 rivals, Tom Bean and Whitewright, back together again after they split apart when Tom Bean dropped down. You have a team in Tioga, obviously, that made a big jump last year. So that's it's a good little district. I don't know much about Nakona in terms of where how well they fit competition wise, but obviously for the most part a lot of people in those districts are familiar with each other because of the last couple of years. So that should be an interesting district. And the other interesting district in 2A Division II, with Collinsville dropping down, they move into District 8 2A Division II, and this is a bigger district. It's Collinsville, Celeste, Chico, Era, Lindsay, Munster, and Santo. And for those of you not familiar with Santo, they are about 45 minutes west of Weatherford. And so you have a team that's out there past Weatherford, and obviously people around here are familiar with where Celeste is. That's the length of this district. And in between you have the little pockets of everybody else, obviously. Lindsay and Munster out on 82. Collinsville where it's at. Era. I mean, it's adding Santo was really sort of a twist. I know some of the people out that way are not real happy that Santo got put in this district because of some of the drives that are going to be involved. I don't know what more they could have done. Everybody in this district, the districts are pretty big. There's not a lot of options, I think, when you get down into when you're sort of trying to piece things together at this level. So Collinsville's in this district. They know Lindsay. They've been, when they've been Division II, they have been with Munster. They have been with I think they've been with Air before. So they are familiar with some of these programs. From a travel when you look at it on a map, it just doesn't make a lot of sense at all. Obviously Munster's going to be the favorite. They've obviously been a really good program at the Division II level. That's, I guess it's fun for them that they get to face Lindsay in a district game now instead of in non-district action. But I think it's gonna be interesting. Obviously, Collinsville did not make the playoffs this last year, so it's going to be interesting to see how they fit in with a lot of new faces for them. I think just looking at like I said, these are off the cuff first reactions. I think they're good enough to make the playoffs. I'm gonna have to do obviously some research on I've never had to pay attention to Santo before. And I know some of these other teams, obviously from some of the other sports that they're in. Obviously, I got to see Celeste. That's who beat Tioga in the first round of the playoffs last year. Really good athletes. Celeste always has good athletes. So obviously they're going to be in the mix. And I'm obviously pay attention to Chico and Era in some of the other sports because of they're in the basketball district with Collinsville and Tioga and that sort of thing. But from a football standpoint, they've always been on the smaller side, so we haven't really had to deal with them lately. So I think Collinsville, you maybe don't want to put it in pen, but definitely in pencil. I think if they look at it, I think they think of themselves as a playoff team in this district. So that's a look at all the football. Like I said, it's definitely some surprises sort of sprinkled in throughout the way. The only thing that didn't change was those Whitesboro and Pottsboro districts. Everything else, there's a little something for everybody in Texoma when it comes to the football change or to the football districts for the next 2 years, whether it's massive changes or just some little tweaks here and there. Now, when it comes to the other sports, and I say other sports as a general qualifier because today for realignment, they only release basketball and volleyball districts. However, and some people have pointed it out, if you're in 5A, 4A, 3A, whatever district you see for basketball or volleyball, that's going to be your baseball district. That's going to be your softball district. That's how they do things. Part of it's because when you get down into that 2A and 1A level, a lot of schools don't play volleyball. A lot of schools have issues fielding baseball and softball teams. So it's a realignment by realignment basis for if those schools are going to participate or not. And so that significantly alters a basketball district because basically everybody plays basketball. So, but if you're in 5A, and we'll start there with Sherman and Denison, when we look at District 13 5A, which has Denison, Sherman, Greenville, Lovejoy, McKinney North, Melissa, and Princeton, that's going to be the baseball district. That's going to be the softball district. That's probably going to be the soccer district. But at least for the big 4 team sports after football, when we talk girls basketball and boys basketball, volleyball, baseball, and softball, that's going to be the district. That's what it's going to look like. And for Sherman and Denison, this is a little bit of a smaller district than what they're currently in. The current district has 8 teams. This has 7. So that's, that makes it, whatever percentage you want to look at it, 15% chance better to make the playoffs. So there's one less team to beat. And you have a good mix of, you're still obviously with each other as rivals in staying in the same district. Lovejoy is still there. McKinney North is still there. Princeton is still there. And you add in Greenville and Melissa. And in this, based on the current realignment, you're losing Wiley East and Rock Hill to 6A, which we knew was going to happen. So we knew those 2 were at least going to leave. And then they took out the Colony, which was a random sort of 2-year. Like when that happened 2 years ago, everybody was kind of like, why is the Colony here? That's just kind of random. They put them back with some Frisco schools and some Carrollton schools. They did actually, for those who care about such things, there is an all Frisco district that has, I got to count them because there's so many of them, that has 7 Frisco teams in it. And then next door, there's also 4 Frisco teams in the next door district. So there are 11 Frisco teams in 5A, and there are a couple in 4A because of enrollment numbers. So they shifted the Colony back out, and we're back to sort of an for the most part, it's an I-75 corridor, from Denison to Lovejoy, and then you kind of have one little spoke going out 380 to get to Princeton, and then Greenville's kind of over there. Again, it's going to depend on the sport, but I think it's a really competitive district. Obviously, like you look at volleyball, everybody's playing for second place behind Lovejoy. But when it comes to some of these other sports, it's going to be interesting to see what basketball is going to look like. It's going to be interesting to see, what baseball and softball are going to look like. I think I think it's going to be a really interesting district. Obviously, like I said, you have some new people in there, so that's always fun. And then you still have some of those rivalries with some of those holdover teams in what is now 13-5A for the other sports that involve Sherman and Denison. Same thing in 4A. Van Alstyne basically has a lot of the same people that they have been with. It's a little bit of a slight change. They kicked out Gainesville and they kicked out Sanger. They sent them to a Western district. And so you have Van Alstyne, Anna, Aubrey, Carrollton Ranch View, Salina, and Frisco Panther Creek. The new teams in there obviously are Ranch View and Panther Creek. And with Melissa moving up and Sanger and Gainesville moving out, this is now a 6-team district instead of a 7-team district. So again, it's going to be a little easier for Van Alstyne to make the playoffs in the other sports. Frisco Panther Creek is a brand new school, so you don't know how good they're going to be. That's sort of a wild card. And Ranch View is a newcomer. You were used to playing Gainesville and Sanger for so long, and Ranch View is a newcomer there. So that's an interesting little tweak for Van Alstyne in 4A, and that's District 11 4A. They got shifted over a little bit in the way the bracket falls. That's they're in 9 4A right now. They got shifted over to 11 4A for the 4A other sports. Down in 3A, not much to say here. District 10 3A, which is where SNS and Whitesboro are, stayed exactly the same. It's Boyd, Callisburg, Paradise, Pilot Point, Ponder, and Valley View as the other teams with SNS and Whitesboro. That's exactly what they've been dealing with. So that's what they're going to stay with for the next 2 years. And then next door in District 11 3A, everything stayed exactly the same except Whitewright dropped out. So instead of having 8 teams, that district now has 7 teams, which is kind of annoying because that means there's going to be a rotating bye, and so that's the way things are shaping up in 3A. You just dropped out Whitewright from 11 3A, but all those are still you might have to deal with some of the same people, but that's how rivalries get built up. You play people 2, 4, 6, 8 years in a row, and then you get those rivalries built up. And obviously we have in that district, it's basically an all local, essentially an all local district. Bells, Blue Ridge, Bonham, Gunner, Howell, Leonard, Pottsboro. You're all in the same general area. Not a lot of travel to get to any of them. So you get to build up those rivalries. So 3A essentially stayed exactly the same for what people have gotten used to over the last couple of years. And so now we'll move down to 2A, and this is where things get a little interesting. And part of that comes on the volleyball side. So normally in the past, what they've done is they've put all the 2A and 1A volleyball teams in the same district so that you would have these bigger districts. And then when the playoffs came, you would split them. You would put the 1A teams that qualified in the 1A bracket, the 2A teams that qualified in a 2A bracket, and then have your playoffs. Well, apparently there was a change, and I don't know how many people knew this. I've talked to some people, and they didn't realize that this was happening. But they are splitting volleyball before the playoffs, so they're in their own districts. So there is 1A volleyball with their own districts, and there's 2A volleyball with their own districts. And what that's done is it's made a lot of super small districts. And in the case for the local teams, every local 2A volleyball team, Collinsville, Tioga, Tom Bean, and Whitewright, have already qualified for the playoffs the next 2 years. They're all in 4-team districts. District 10-2A is Collinsville, Lindsay, Tioga, and Tom Bean. And District 11-2A is Sam Rayburn, Trenton, Whitewright, and Wolf City. Well, 4 teams go to the playoffs. There's 4 teams in your district. And voila, there you go. So the only question is, what is your seeding going to be? And I assume because these districts are so small, and because it's going to be hard to find non-district games at that time of the year because everybody else is in district, I would imagine they're probably going to do a home and home. So you're playing everybody in your district 4 times so that you get 12 district matchups. You could do a best of 3 type of deal to get to 9, but I have a feeling you'll probably play everybody once through home and away, and then just repeat that so that you have enough games to go to have a full schedule. But no matter what, all those teams are going to the playoffs based on the way the districts were set up, and that's going to be the case for a lot of these 2A districts. There are a lot of just 4-team districts. I'm looking at in the region. There's 8 districts in the region, and I'm adding them up here, and I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Half of the region is a 4-team district, and a couple of the other ones are 5-teamers. So 4 of those 5 teams are going to go to the playoffs. I don't know if that was intentional. I don't know if they just did that for balance. I don't know if they thought about just making completely empty districts to make bigger districts. But that has guaranteed all 4 of the local teams, Collinsville, Tioga, Tom Bean, and Whitewright, are going to go to the playoffs in volleyball. Now, when it comes to basketball, there are significantly more teams that play basketball that don't play volleyball. And just like we saw in 3A when it came to that, there are not very many changes for what we're going to see in basketball for 2A. The current District 13 2A is staying exactly the same. Collinsville and Tioga are again joined by Alvord, Chico, Arrow, Lindsay, and Munster. That's not going to change for the next 2 years. And the only change in District 14 2A, which currently has Tom Bean, Celeste, Honeygrove, Sam Rayburn, Bland, Trenton, and Wolf City, is Whitewright dropping down. They had to put Whitewright in somewhere, and that was obviously the most logical spot with all of those teams essentially in that where Tom Bean is the westernmost school, and you kind of make your way a little bit towards the eastern Texas. That was a perfect fit. There was no other place that Whitewright was going to go. So that district is essentially the same, except you added in Whitewright there. So very little change when it comes to 2A basketball, and the baseball and softball for 2A will come out here in another month or so. Like I said, that depends on the availability and schools that say, yeah, we're going to play baseball, we have enough kids. Some will say, no, we don't have enough for softball, but we have enough for baseball. So those districts are going to look a little different. But we'll have something out there for when those do get released, probably in the next 6 weeks or so as they start to finalize that stuff. So that's the look at this year's realignment. Like I said, it was definitely more surprising than it has been. I do feel the last two cycles, we really weren't expecting a whole lot of craziness. The things that we knew going in didn't really change a whole lot. So I wasn't as surprised the last time. There were definitely surprises. There were definitely changes that had big effects on Texoma teams that are going to be in place for the next 2 years, and then and we'll see how they handle that. But it's going to be interesting. Non-district schedules will start rolling in. District schedules will start rolling in. But that's kind of the first blush of what realignment did to the Texoma schools today. Thank you for tuning in. I don't know when the next podcast is going to be. Maybe we'll put something together. But I know everybody pays attention to realignment. It's obviously a big day on the calendar for sure. Thanks for tuning in as always. Stay warm, stay safe, and we'll talk to you the next time. Again, thanks for listening to the Herald Democrat Sports Podcast.